Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. I'm like, this is probably the best day to do a panel because I can hear and I don't have to feel like I'm yelling. So I'm very excited that this is the day that we're getting. Yeah, right? Like, I'm not going to lose my voice here. So that's fabulous. So thanks for joining us. We have a really exciting topic, joined here by our friends at Reddit and all talking about culture and trends. So before we kind of hop in, let's kind of do a quick little overview. I think everyone knows the front page of the internet, Reddit. It's, I think, the fourth highest trafficked site on the internet. So I'm sure we're all a little bit aware of what Reddit is, but will you just give us a quick overview of what it is? It's expanded a lot.
To. Hi, everyone. So yeah, we'll start this off with just a quick ELI5 or explain like I'm 5 style primer on what Reddit even is. I'll try to keep this simple and digestible. So I'll break down 5 of the main tenets of Reddit that make it unique. And we'll start with community because it is impossible to talk about Reddit without first talking about community. Reddit is a community of communities where people can dive into any topic, interest, passion, hobby, career, identity. There's truly a subreddit or a community for anything you might be interested in. And with over 100,000 active communities, from r/cocktails to r/stop drinking, from pets to parenting, it's home to some of the most interesting conversations online. So I'll preface this with just think about community when you think about Reddit. Next, I would say voting is another integral part of the Reddit experience. So Reddit is a democracy where everyone has a voice. And just like a democracy, Reddit also runs on votes where people upvote the content that they think is informative, interesting, entertaining, valuable, and downvote anything that feels unproductive or off topic to the community. So this helps the best content on Reddit surface to the top. When people vote or comment on your content, you receive karma, which is another pillar of the Reddit experience. So karma is essentially fake internet points that we dole out to encourage good behavior on the platform. Every user has a karma score that's visible on their profile and acts as a badge that signals, the type of user that they are based on how long they've been on the platform, how often they participate in communities. I think I'm at 4. Yeah. The next is our moderators. So mods, as we affectionately refer to them as, are really integral to keeping Reddit thriving. They are teams of volunteer users that essentially help manage and govern the communities that are near and dear to their heart. They do this by creating guidelines that everyone in the community must abide by, and they also actively moderate the content within those communities. The final thing I'll touch on, I'm at 5, is privacy. So I think one of the things that makes Reddit really unique is that users on our platform can decide how much or how little about their real life identity they want to share. Most, I would say, definitely operate under a username on the platform that's completely unrelated to their real life identity, and the more absurd the username, the better. And others use their government name. It's totally up to the user to decide how they want to self-identify and ultimately the experience they want to have on our platform. So that's kind of a quick overview of what Reddit is. But I think the value of Reddit is definitely lies within the passion that our communities feel. If you've been on Reddit before and you've been in a community, they care a lot about the topics that they're invested in. And so that passion just comes through in so many different ways, and it really allows people to have a myriad of different experience on the platform. A lot of people come to Reddit for product recommendations. Others come to Reddit for advice or support. Some just come for entertainment and distraction. There's truly a Reddit experience for every person. I think that's what makes it so special.
Cool. Yeah, it's very different than other social media platforms. I think some of that privacy piece is a big reason why it's so different, because you can kind of be whoever you want on Reddit and have passions in all the places that maybe people don't see about you in your normal life. So yeah, that's a really cool, great 5 points about Reddit there. Okay, so let's talk about who you guys are at Reddit, what you do. Matt, you want to start?
More than happy to. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
My name is Matt Klein. I'm the head of global Foresight here at Reddit. I like to argue I have one of the coolest jobs, which is to make sense of all the data on our platform across all those communities, across all those discussions, to really understand what's happening in culture forecast where it's going next, and then most importantly, help our brands and advertisers really know how to show up on the platform in a more strategic, resonant, and creative manner. That's the gig.
No big deal.
Something like that.
Yeah, Matt has a cool job. I think I have a cooler job. Yeah, I'm head of social media at Reddit, which means I oversee Reddit's organic social program, which is all of our social channels across Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, for our consumer, business to business, and then international market program. So my role is really just about keeping up with what's happening in our own communities and on our own platform, but also on pretty much every social platform there is, which is a lot of fun and never a dull moment.
We'll take votes on like who has the cooler job after this, but and talking about culture and trends, what's the KPIs? How are we measuring culture? Because it does feel a little elusive, but in your role, that's kind of what you're doing, analyzing the data, making some trends and movement assessments. How do you do that?
So maybe we'll start with the data itself. So I like to think of culture as the greatest organized data set of really culture that's ever existed. And to be able to play with that is really a playground for really anyone interested in trying to understand what's happening next. It's a gold mine for strategists, for advisors, for really anyone wanting to know how to show up on the platform. Closer. Much better. Okay. In a more strategic manner, right? So the ways in which we're doing this is by really looking at, again, community growth, looking at the conversations, looking at the ways in which brands are being mentioned, the share of voice, the sentiment of those brands. So for example, if we take an entertainment client who's interested in, say, horror films, we can look at the 100 plus entertainment communities related to just horror or scary films, understand when those are spiking, and then further understand the keywords within that. So we could go back to that client and help them understand, okay, this is what horror fans are most interested in, and if you were to show up on the platform, here's how to do so. But more importantly, we could also help them inform content production as well, based upon the fans that they're trying to get after. So that's kind of the data that we're playing with. But to answer the original question of, right, how we're approaching trends, we're trying to separate really something in culture, ironically, that is really problematic, which is the conflation of trending and trends. So as marketers who are chronically living online, we're obsessed with the trending. The trending is the story of the day, the meme of the moment, the hashtag, the aesthetic, the core, whatever it is. But the trending is ephemeral in nature. It's going to fade. So here at Reddit, we're thinking more about more sustained, energetic things, and more importantly, things that have more weight. So that's really what we're trying to prioritize, because when we help brands, we want to make sure that they're showing up in a way that's sustainable and that is advantageous to whatever they're trying to get after.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because, agreed, trends are not here to stay, right, as I've seen and looking back at pictures from middle school. And so I think that those major moments, right, culture is a little bit more tangibly going to stay for a lot longer, right? So how are you incorporating that in social? I mean, you have all this robust data from Reddit, and then how is that what does that look like when you apply it to the brand?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, as someone who works in brand social, I mean, trends, while not in my title, are still very integral to the work that we do. And I don't think I don't think our argument is that trends are a bad thing. I do think they serve a purpose, which is, by and large, helping brand managers like myself seem easily dialed into culture, and it gives you something to react against. And those are all important tools to have when you are managing a social media program for a company. I think where we see, these movements coming through is really having like a through line through your marketing. So I think it's okay to activate against trends, but also what is the larger mission or movement that your brand is thinking about, and how can those trends align with that? So I think in the case of Reddit, we're fortunate because we're a very mission-driven company. Reddit's mission is to provide community, belonging, and empowerment to anyone in the world. And so that is our North Star with everything that we do on social media. And so sure, we may find trends that feel relevant to our brands, but we're always relating it back to our mission and making sure that it makes sense for us and that we feel like we're not just doing things for the sake of doing things, and there's some strategic and thoughtfulness behind it.
If I could add one thing just to highlight that, I think what's really important is to say it's not that culture is not important. Culture is the most important thing. And as marketers, we're often obsessed with, say, the consumer data or the financial data, but culture is the stuff in between. It's the gray, the sticky, the weird, the ambiguous, but that's the operating system for everything else. So I think what we're trying to say more precisely is that we have to interrogate the trends that we're absolutely obsessed with, and more importantly, is this actually rooted in human behavior? Because when we think of the trending is driven by an algorithm, right? It's devoid of the human sense-making or desires or craves of what people actually want. So when we approach culture, it's through this lens of, well, is this just perpetuated for an algorithm for the sake of it, or is this actually rooted in the needs of people? And back to Reddit, and why Reddit's so special is because the ways in which people are showing up is true to what they're most passionate about, which is why we're seeing these things of movements or more substantial trends or shifts in culture, rather than, say, the fleeting or the ephemeral.
I love that. Okay, so what are the movements that you're seeing in Reddit right now?
So I'll touch upon one to kick us off. One that I'm absolutely fascinated with is called keyboard confessionals. Keyboard confessionals is this idea that in a moment of cultural complexity and moral ambiguity, people are trying to figure out and navigate good versus bad just based upon all the opinions that are out there. What this actually looks like on the platform is the significant growth of the community called Am I the Asshole? For those not familiar with Am I the Asshole, it's the #1 most viewed community on our entire platform in 2022, which was up from the previous year. Am I the Asshole essentially works as people come, they make a post, and they share a questionable story, and then ask the crowd, am I the asshole? And in the comments, people debate, and debate, and debate, and upvote and downvote, and debate whether or not that individual is the asshole or not, until they come to the consensus, asshole or not the asshole. And it sounds like a very superficial, kind of like frivolous signal, but when we triangulate that with other really significant data points on the platform, we see other communities rising in a similar vein, like True Confessionals or TIFU, which stands for Today I Fucked Up, both really significant rising year over year. And to us, that signals something really interesting in culture where people are looking for spaces to figure out how to navigate or further look for acceptance or to apologize, perhaps in a culture that is too stringent or has too much pressure or is too perfectionistic, if that's even a word in the first place. So we find that really interesting in that these are offline desires and behaviors and feelings that people are coming to the platform with, and then taking those experiences and then going off platform as well to continue to live your life, which is very different than, say, a hashtag or rather, cottagecore, whatever that is, which isn't actually rooted in the people's real experiences.
And I think the brand implication for a movement like Keyboard Confessionals, like Matt said, I mean, I think these movements are deeply rooted in human nature. And I think what this is sort of telling, or the signal this is giving for brands, is that people really want transparency and radical candor, right? I mean, I'm on the comms team at Reddit, so I'm, fully aware of like the crisis cycle and how that works. And it's really not a matter of when or if your brand is going to be in a crisis, it's when, and when you find yourself in that situation. It's about having accountability, owning up to it, having a very, honest dialogue with your community about what went wrong, and then not doing that again. So I just think it's like an interesting takeaway. It might not manifest itself in like your marketing or a content, campaign, but like it can also sort of inform just how your brand operates, whether that's like marketing, comms, or something else.
So maybe we hit one more. The second one that we've been talking about is called Building Blocks Over Big Bets, which is really about slowing down and as individuals focusing on the incremental, the slow, the safe, things that actually have control in our lives in a moment, again, of cultural unpredictability and chaos. And what that looks like is the community Personal Finance, which has grown, again, significantly year over year. Personal Finance has been a mainstay on our platform, but we're also seeing communities like Personal Finance UK or r/Frugal, other communities dedicated to a slow incremental progress. Two things are interesting here. Besides the fact that it's just growing and popping across all of our dashboards, the language being used in these communities is also really interesting. Using words like journey, embark, compound in ways that we haven't seen before. And then third, what's really interesting here is that this flies in the face of another narrative that we've seen, especially on the platform, of betting on stonks. And something in culture has shifted where people are now betting on themselves and taking a slower, more incremental, safe approach to their finances. But it's beyond finances as well. We see this within subreddits like Lose It or Gain It. Two health wellness communities dedicated to either losing weight or gaining muscle. And again, the language that's being used in these communities signals something really fascinating in culture. people are rolling up their sleeves, acknowledging, I'm not going to lose weight over the next week, but I'm going to start this journey in a way, again, that we haven't seen before. And further, surround themselves with like-minded people who are going to keep them motivated and accountable. That's new. And to us, that signals something interesting in regards to hedging bets. And now we're trying to take it slow and safe. And as for brands, there's something there.
Yeah, definitely. I think, similar to how as a culture we may be moving away from a get rich or get fit quick scheme, and one towards, holistic, sustainable health. I think, folks are going to expect the same from their favorite brands. I think as a brand, it's about shifting your focus away from quick wins and one towards, really becoming a trustworthy brand that stands the test of time. I think people are more shrewd than ever and can really see through everyone's bullshit. And so they expect you to kind of have that same long-term steady growth and reliability as they, feel about themselves. So I definitely think that's an interesting one that, I'm curious to kind of see how brands start to adopt that mindset more often.
And it could speak to marketing comms as well beyond just like a macro thing, right? It's focusing on long-term value. There's another subreddit called Buy It for Life, where people are debating items that they could just buy once and not have to replace because of the quality. So right, as brands thinking about how does this inform messaging, it could be on longevity or durability over something, right, that is going to just be a use once type of thing. So meeting the consumer based upon what they're actually caring about and talking about.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. Like, these are indeed cultural movements, right? Like, they are here to stay, and they speak more to humanity, right? Like the humanity that we're all experiencing now, rather than just like, oh, cookieless future or recession or inflation and like all of those hot moments that we're trying to like grasp on as marketers. But if we really examine as brands, like, we need to be human to the humans that we're talking to, right? Whether it's in comms or our brands or whatever, but that's who we need to be. And what people actually want is to be themselves or to grow slowly and buy things that last. They want things that matter. So yeah, I have probably 10 more questions, but I did want to like open it up to the audience. Is there any questions that you guys have around the trends on Reddit or culture and movement? Any questions? Yes, you're both in red, so I don't even know how to differentiate here.
So, as a brand, what is the best way to respond today? Now that, especially when you see something negative about your brand, I feel like that's always been a challenge, but it seems like a different today than before. So, like, what do you see in terms of who's responding well and already?
I'll speak to just attitude or approach. I mean, we think a lot about just community because we are a community of communities. The secret sauce of community is just persistence and showing up and creating an environment where a brand is willing to face, right, negative comments and not hide away from it or not, remove, et cetera, et cetera. I think the real strategy there is, we've used this word, community management, for way too long. You can't manage a community. Right? The community is of the people. And we see that with the brands on our platform as well. Right? They see their community, right? Their actual brand, and they have to acknowledge, oh no, this is of the people. We now have to be community participants, not the managers of that community. And by showing up and just hanging out and asking questions and building in public, we've seen brands really succeed in that way.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Just the letting people be, I think is important. I think everyone knows that there's no perfect brand, right? Like, a brand is made up of people, right? So we can't force anyone to be perfect. I think of even just like, often in marketing, we talk about the funnel, right? And I'm like, oh, there's no funnel. People buy and all over the internet. There's no like top, bottom. They're all over the place and they'll buy when they want to, right? So we can't force, in the same way that you're not forcing communities, there's no way to force people down the funnel. There's no way to make them happy. We just can be who we are. Was there another question? Yeah.
You may have kind of answered it already. Nate Nichols, creative director of Palette Group. And speaking of being, and you said brands have to be human, because we're all humans. And there's this really beautiful notion in there. But in humanity, there is inherent alienation at times, right? Like, our red shirts could be alienating someone right now with visual, challenges. And I guess, how do you advise brands, toe that line of supporting a community and just being and not tilting over towards alienation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think something, we keep kind of hounding the word community, but definitely feels like a through line in sort of all of these topics. But, I think as a brand, it's important to identify who your community is. And your community is not just your followers, and it's not just your consumers or the people who are purchasing your product or service. It's much larger than that. And I think if you want to have any sort of resonance, it's so important to actually collaborate with your community, whether that's co-creating, co-authoring, co-producing. I mean, UGC has become more and more popular across almost every single brand's marketing and social media programming. And I think that's just a testament to giving your community a platform through your brand, whether that's your social channels, your content, your campaigns. If you look at we've talked about brands we love. Fenty Beauty prioritizes diversity and representation in all of its content. And I think that's something where they've really thought about bringing people in versus excluding people or making them feel alienated. And so I think it's that collaboration that can really help to drop walls between your brand and the community that you're trying to build.
Awesome. Any other questions before we keep going? Go ahead.
You were talking about the importance of trends versus fads. How do you tell the difference?
Great question. So the way in which we like to think of it is going back to basics, physics 101. We'll do a pop quiz. Does anyone know the equation for force? Everyone's faces just want to, yeah. Boom, there we go. So more simply, force is very impressive. Force is the weight of something times the speed of something as marketers. We'll distill it down. But if we unpack that, we're getting our equation for force wrong right now when we approach online culture, right? We're not actually thinking about the weight and the speed. We'll start with speed. Everything in culture is fast, right? Everything. Speed is table stakes. Perhaps it's the slower moving things that are more noteworthy, the things with sustained energy and momentum and progress. Maybe that's worth keeping our eye on. Right now, we're just focused on new because the new goes fast. And then as for weight, we're doing a very similar thing. We're not actually focused on weight because of algorithms. Everything is big. Everything has 1 trillion views overnight. But if you look at a bowling ball and a balloon, both have two very different sizes, the same sizes, but very different weights. The thing is, when we look at the equation for force, we're more interested in weight, not the size. But we're being distracted by size. So what we actually have to do and what we think about at Reddit is going back to the original definition of force. It's not, is it big and is it new? And that's how we got into this mess in the first place, is it a heavy weight? Is it actually rooted in human behavior? Is there meaning here? And does this have sustained speed and energy over time and is not going to fade? So that's kind of our litmus test or threshold of what to pay attention to.
Hello, first off, I'd like to say thank you. My name is Chase Winovich. I'm a co-founder of an app called Signet. We use QR codes combined with templates to provide, easy signature solutions for people on the go. However, when it comes to Reddit, it's and then we think about the marketing approach and how to effectively target our community or our audience. It's really people that have something to lose. So it's do you have any advice for being able to cover a plethora of different communities with this principle and the best way to approach the marketing in that regard? Thank you.
Sure. Great question. Yes. So on Reddit, because we have a community-based model, it means that it's very easy to identify interests or topics. So essentially, interest targeting is your bread and butter on Reddit because you're finding people exactly where they are and they're already having these conversations. As a brand, I think some advice that as the platform advice that we always give to brands is to think of Reddit communities as a cocktail party. You would never show up to a party at a friend's house and just begin shouting your unsolicited thoughts over the music, because that would be super weird. You would stay, you'd hang, you'd have a drink, you'd ask questions, you'd listen, you'd ask people's names, you would get to know people, and then once you feel like the time is right or it's appropriate, you would share your thoughts. And so, online communities are no different than IRL communities or gatherings of people where it's important to have that dialogue and to feel like you're actually listening first and foremost and talking second. And so I think that sort of layer of the brand experience on Reddit is so important. And of course, there's plenty of advertising solutions where you can, run paid ads directed towards communities or specific topics, but also I think it's important to consider how you're showing up organically on the platform so that it feels like a holistic and thoughtful approach to, community marketing.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Listening, I think, is really hard as marketers, though, because we just have so much to say. But I think in online communities, it makes a lot of sense to just like take a beat and listen and like insert yourself into the conversation in the most organic and thoughtful way that's actually going to be valuable, not just to your brand and not just to what you want to say, but to who you're actually speaking to within the community. So I think that's very thoughtful. Any other questions? I don't actually know how much time we have left. 5 minutes. Okay, got it. Any other questions? All right, so trends, culture, movements, what are we excited about? Is there anything that you are, maybe isn't a totally movement yet, but something that is looking like it's going to turn into something this year or next year?
I have one.
Okay.
It's one that we are calling an Us We Trust, which is essentially the democratization of medical advice that we're seeing on Reddit. So in communities like r/medical advice, people are coming together to trust strangers online with some of the most sensitive and personal information that there is, which is one's health. And we're calling it distributed trust. It's sort of like, let me crowdsource my personal health-related questions and try to understand what's happening, which I just think is like such a scalable concept and one that has been very sort of near and dear to my heart in the last year as I've been sort of on a fertility journey. The Reddit fertility communities have been like my safe space. And so, you know, you're not going to call up your doctor in the middle of the night every time you have a question or a concern or a worry, but these communities are always on, and there is truly no question that is too big, too personal, too small, too irrelevant. It is like the most understanding and empathetic group of people I've truly ever come across. And, you know, I'm super lucky to have access to great healthcare and a team of doctors, but for a lot of people who don't, it is the first resource that they have to understand more about their reproductive health. And so I'm just, really excited about that one. And I think it's just so special to the Reddit experience that you're not really going to find on other platforms.
That's very cool.
Mine's not as meaningful.
Okay.
Sorry. The one I'm super interested in, I mean, we've seen this before. We call it people-powered progress. Like, what happens when communities like link arms and do incredible things once they're empowered? We've seen prior movements on Reddit, which we don't have to discuss. A couple that I'm really interested in is a community called No Lawns, where it's really interrogating eco-diversity and how we could reapproach front lawns and backyards to better the climate and just better our own neighborhoods. And a similar community that I'm spending way too much time on is called guerrilla gardening. And guerrilla gardening is essentially just planting seeds where seeds are not supposed to be planted in order to reclaim cities. But I think what's really interesting here is like when people feel empowered, they could change urban planning. And as someone who lives in New York, I'm certainly interested in more plants and flowers in my neighborhood. So that's something that I'm really interested in.
Very cool. Thanks, guys. This has been an awesome conversation. Thanks for all the questions. And yeah, this is awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks.